Indigenous Traditional Mental Health by Sheila Nikashi. Defining traditional medicine. Traditional medicine and healing are difficult concepts to define, as many Aboriginal peoples describe the medicine and practices within the localized geographical contents of their community or nation. The term traditional medicine is defined by HO is the sum total of knowledge, skills, and practices based on theories, beliefs, and experiences indigenous to different cultures, whether inexplicable or not, used in the maintenance of health as well as in the prevention, diagnosis, improvement of treatment of physical and mental illness. Traditional healing, defined by the Royal Commission of Aboriginal Peoples, practices designed to promote mental, physical, and spiritual well-being that are based on beliefs which go back to the time before the spread of Western scientific biomedicine. When Aboriginal peoples in Canada talk about traditional healing, they include a wide range of activities, from physical cures using herbal medicines and other remedies, to the promotion of psychological and spiritual well-being using ceremony, counseling, and the accumulative wisdom of elders. Defining the traditional medicine, terms elder and healer are used interchangeably since traditional teachings are considered healing for the mind. Elder is another term attached to traditional healing that is discussed in the Gathering Strength volume of the report Royal Commission of Aboriginal Peoples. The report states that elders are keepers of tradition, guardians of culture, and wise people, the teachers. While most of those who are wise in traditional ways are old, not all old people are elders, and not all elders are old. Indigenous knowledge has a multiplicity of sources, including traditional, passed on through generations through oral stories, histories, and interactions with the environment. Empirical observations made over time and incorporated into an ecological knowledge. Spiritual, a revelation understood through dreams, visions, or even as divine messengers. From the healing the generations, post-trauma stress, and the health status of Aboriginal populations in Canada conforms the role of historical trauma and the need to develop a model for mental health services to Aboriginal populations. They suggest the following criteria are necessary to develop an efficient model. 1, an acknowledgement of the social historical contents. 2, a reframing of stress responses. 3, a focus on holistic health and cultural renewal. 4, approval of psychoeducational and therapeutic approach. 5, a communal and cultural model of grieving and healing. Further, there are 4 phases for community healing, which include getting a core group together to address healing needs, increasing healing activity, recognition of root causes of addictions or abuse, building capacity by providing training, and lastly, shift from fixing problems to transforming system. Defining traditional medicine, cultural and spiritual revitalization with strengthening family bonds, since the activities of drumming, dancing, and singing are cultive and social by nature. Traditional medicine is still in the widespread use and is crucial for healthcare professionals to have an understanding of the basic ideologies of holistic health, which underscores an Indigenous approach to health. Healing for Aboriginal peoples is within the ceremonial context. Their ideas and beliefs emerge and are reinforced through the physical, mental, and spiritual experiences. Ways to restore balance in all areas of life, including education, raising self-esteem, claiming their identity, asserting their dignity, learning their traditions, customs, and spiritual teachings, and letting go of pain. All approaches have many facets. The healing is holistic, inclusive of improving mental, emotional, psychological, and spiritual states. The improvements of economical, political, and social standings are interlocked with holistic aspirations of traditional healing practices. Within the medicine wheel is an Aboriginal framework in a visual shape of a circle divided into 4 quadrants. Each quadrant represents a direction along with teachings for that direction. The medicine wheel is one of the basic symbols of the worldview of First Nations, among many prairie Prairie First Nations. Although the medicine wheel symbol has different meanings and expressions for different First Nations, some of the principles are quite universal. That everything is related to everything else, that things cannot be understood outside of their context and interactions, and that there are four aspects to a human condition: the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. Description is taken largely from the Plains First Nations, but the major elements, although they have been expressed differently by other First Nations and Inuit people, are basic concepts similar to all. The medicine wheel to the Plains First Nations, there are differing options as to the origin of the medicine wheel. Researcher approached a Cree elder, Roger Fox, to discuss the origin of the medicine wheel, and they anticipated that the medicine wheel originated with the Plains Cree. Indigenous people, Elder Fox explained, that the Creator created First Nations peoples first, and that he gave each First Nation special gifts and different ways, ceremonies, to grow spiritually and communicate with the Creator. He stated many First Nation peoples have knowledge of and use the medicine wheel in different ways. He explained that the grandfathers share teachings with all First Nation peoples, and once the teaching has been shared, there is no ownership of it. It becomes communal knowledge for that community. The medicine wheel, the four areas I was mentioning, first is spiritual, a sense of connectedness with other creatures of the Great Spirit. Must connect to the physical: air, water, food, clothing, shelter, exercise, and sex. With the emotional section, recognition, acceptance, understanding, love, privacy, discipline, limits. And the intellectual section, concepts, ideas, thoughts, habits, discipline. Within the healing elders, traditional elders defined as people performing actions within communities to reduce pain and suffering, recognized by sufficient members of their community as having the skills and training and experience necessary to do so, and embodying the traditions, values, and beliefs of that community. Healing elders typically use the historical healing practices of their family, tribal group, or community. Most Indigenous people have one or more elders upon whom they rely for guidance and healing, sometimes family members, sometimes not. Healing, the elders participating in this project were regularly approached by members of the community for healing and prayers and were recognized as spiritual people. There were also those with whom I had already spent many hours attending their ceremonies, sharing clients with them, and watching them work. These pre-existing relationships provide a crucial foundation for my being able to sit with them and discuss how mental health practitioners should be trained. Traditional elders, I gave each elder tobacco, sometimes colored cloth or prayer ties, and usually another gift each time I sat with them. This acknowledged their role as a teacher and mine as the learner. Unlike a conventional study with multiple subjects and one researcher, I was the subject and the elders were the teachers. These elders found the unusual research format of consent forms, confidentiality, and data collection highly amusing. And as one said, he would never participate in such nonsense. Nevertheless, they humored me by signing consent for participating in the ethics committee approval interview study. They considered themselves to be my teachers and were satisfied when I would repeat back what they had said correctly. They were offered co-authorship, but all denied, believing that writing papers was trivial and should be left to me as my thing. This was your journey, one said. Now you tell your people about it. Our people already knows all these things. An open-ended narrative-style dialogue was utilized with each elder over several meetings. The discussions included their views on 1, mind, 2, mental health, 3, the disorders they recognize of the mind and mental health, 4, who should be involved in the healing mental health problems, and 5, what should they know. 6, how they should be trained. I had previously been trained by several of them in the art of listening, which is crucial to the study with elders and means that acquired ability to remember and render an entire discussion without notes or recordings. They sometimes wander far from the original topics, compatible with the narrative approach. When I learned from our discussions was presented to the elders for their review and critique as an Indigenous adoption of the grounded theory model. The elders and I formed think tanks to discuss what I have learned from all of our discussions. We strive for ideas that should guide the training program being created, ideas on which everyone could agree. We call the process quality improvement in advance. This iterative back and forth process resulted in an anonymous agreement on 12 concepts that seemed crucial to an Indigenous understanding of mind and mental health. The sample represents the results of a cross-cultural group of healers who engage in dialogue and came to the same anonymous conclusions. They do not represent the views of any community or particular cultural group. The following 12 key concepts of Indigenous knowledge about mental health well-being were identified through the consensus process with the 19 elders. Number 1, genuinely listening is very important for the healing process. One elder said, people tell you what's wrong if you listen. They tell you how to help them. They tell you what needs to be done. The underlying principle appeared to be that all healing emerged from dialogue that happens on many levels. Dialogue means talking in order to listen. One Cree elder spoke about listening to his dreams before someone consulted him. The dreams gave him important information about what to do to help that person. Other elders spoke about the importance of story. Their ideas were similar to those of the narrative psychology. Several elders spoke about suffering existence within the contents of a story, for all we are is stories. In explanation, they said that all that is left when we die are the stories told about us. They believe that the self we believe we are is just the story we tell ourselves to make sense of all the stories that have been told about us. The story lives us as we live the story. They stressed out to understand an illness. It is necessary to place it within the contents of the story that the person is living. To help a person, we must hear as many stories that are being or have been told about the person as is possible. They acknowledge that we can never hear them all, but we can try. For example, I watched a Cree elder diagnose celiac disease in 2 hours. In this disease, people had antibody responses to their gut to the ingestive of gluten and a constituent of wheat and some other grains. Anxiety and depression are common. The woman who was diagnosed had been to a number of psychiatrists for anxiety and depression and had always received medications. The elder carefully reconstructed her story from her life before the first symptom, through the beginning of the illness, through its blossoming to the present time. Within an hour, she began to suspect that the woman has been suffering from something she was eating. He pursued this line of questioning and discovered that her worst days were those during which she ate desserts. All her desserts contained dairy, wheat, and sugar. Then he told her to stop eating desserts. You need to fast, he said, fast 4 days. Then drink all good water for 1 day. Add another food each day. It's probably one of those European foods, he said. Our bodies can't handle them. It's not natural for us. We eat caribou, fish, rabbit, and berries. Breads and cakes and chips and even a lot of the vegetables make us sick. Our blood is different. The clues were more obvious in retrospect, but the powerful listening skills of the elder had brought them out. This woman had suffered for 8 years, plagued by mental fog, anxiety, and depression. Friends had suggested that she might have had food allergies or food-related illnesses. She couldn't believe that the food-related illnesses could cause such severe symptoms, and her doctors concurred. Each successive physician blamed stress and depression for her troubles. The elder did a ceremony to remove her illness. Immediately after, words came into her mind that she had to stop eating greens. 2 months later, one of the grain-free diet, she was amazingly better. On a green 2 months later, on a grain-free diet, she was amazingly better. When she cheated and ate chocolate cake, her symptoms returned in full force. Disappearingly again, when she fasted and cleared the cake from her system, each time she went off her diet, her symptoms returned, strengthening her belief that she did have celiac disease and that dietary therapy could help. Number 2, teach a rationale model of the self. None of the elders espoused a structural model of the self. They did not believe in a Platonic self that can be discovered existing independently of the external world. The elders believed that mind and self arise through a process of relational social development. They saw each person as internalizing all the stories that had ever been told about him or her into an identity that eventually became a story about all the stories. They did not share the European concept of the authentic self, for they did not believe in a self except as a unifying story to guide our behavior. The elders did not separate mind and brain. They believe that people with damaged brains have constraints upon their sense of self, mind, and capability. But for non-impairment people, they saw the self as being a story that arose through relationships, through incorporating all the stories people tell around the person. Self is mediated through other people. First, the mother or other primary caretakers. Second, their peers. Third, through a broader media that presents and represents the stories of cultural. White believed that we construct a model or a narrative about ourselves based upon the results of our reflections, and then we perform that narrative in the world, consistent with the elders' views. They agreed that the performance of self-narrative gives us a corrective feedback to further refine our story that we tell ourselves about who we are. Western people tell themselves Siddharthic-like stories in which they uncover their true self. When asked, "Who are you?" Indigenous people tell stories about relationships and interconnections. The elders' views resembled that of Wittgenstein, who said, "Understanding is like knowing how to go on. It is an ability." They did not believe in the mental state for which our acts spring, but rather spoke of people's behavior being determined by the stories and the contents in which they found themselves. The elders' concepts of self relied upon the creation of self through interaction with others. It is, as White said, a performed self. A co-creation arising from relationships with others and within landscapes of experiencing and meaning. The landscapes coalesce, which means come together to form one mass or whole, to form a topology that is local culture, practices, and knowledge. The concept of self is embedded in this local geography of meaning and values. Number 3, teach how to help people and groups find their own solutions to problems rather than relying on externally imposed solutions. The elders were consistent in their belief that imposing an answer on someone or family or community would not work. People must find their own answers. They must be empowered to receive their own divine guidance. They believed that the helper or elder was only present to facilitate the conversation. The elders' perspective was consistent with the view that increasing emphasis on the individual and communities and an increasing isolation of problems from group concern leads to social disruption and consistently prohibits the formation and utilization of the necessary social relationships for the development of local solutions. It is then that communities turn to external experts to impose their distant solutions. The elders said that we should teach people how to help people find their own answers. We need to teach them the skills of empowerment and help them to trust their ability to self-heal. The elders discussed connectivity, meaning our connections with everything around us, within us, and to that which encompasses us. They discuss accountability, that we are accountable to others to whom we relate for our actions. The elders agree with Freedom and Compose, who wrote, different selves come forth in different contexts, and no one self is truer than any other. While no self is truer than any other, it is true that particular presentations of self are preferred by particular people within particular cultures. The preferred self is the self that people can first recognize in their experiences and stories, and which they can then project into the future in the form of a story they would like to be telling, then living, then themselves. Indigenous concepts of self invite us to challenge modern notions of the self as a unitary core of being that seeks expression through some singular voice that can, with genuine authority, represent its own interests. 4, teach that people are self-healing. Elders return to the idea that nature heals herself and that we are a part of nature. They didn't have to know how to help themselves. Their job was to start a conversation between those who suffered and nature, spirits, and even with specific elements of nature such as rivers, land, and mountains. They were confident that healing would unfold as the information was shared. They focused upon the mysterious inheritance of dialogical forms of activity in which surprises appeared and led to healing outside of what we have predicted. All we need to know, one said, is already within us. It's this modern world that tricks us to not believe in the information we receive. You have to teach people to have faith again. You have to teach people to see themselves as part of nature. Then they can believe in their own healing abilities. Look at a stripped mind. Nature even eventually covers up that mess and heals it. The same happens with people. 5, teach students to be selfless and intent. Time and again, the elders emphasized the power of intent and the need for selfless intent. For some, it took the form of never profiting from their healing. Others were willing to profit, but only if their work succeeded. Still, others were willing to profit regardless in the sense of being paid or gifted for their time, but all insisted that it was necessary to hold the highest good of the person or people being healed in the highest light above all considerations of personal reward. Even praise can become a reward that interferes with healing, one elder said. The elders agreed that young people need to be comfortable and make a nice salary, but they also agreed that healing was a calling and the people needed to approach it from a selfless point of view. They emphasized that the healer may be the only person who believes that sick person can get well. The elders said that they would only work with health practitioners who were relatively pure of intent. These practitioners had to care more for other people than themselves, and said that we had to nurture that care and concern by taking good care of them. 6, teach students to be passionate about their work. The best training is to have had an illness, one elder said, or at least they have to do everything that they ask others to do. These elders did believe that practitioners should have to take a medication they prescribed, even though that would make sense to the biomedical practitioner. The elders had learned all their herbs and other therapies that way and didn't see why it didn't also apply equally to drugs. They believed that self-healing would generate the passion necessary to inspire quality of work. They spoke about the motivation that could inspire passion, for example, illness and other family members, spirit calling, and more. Several elders told stories about people who had come to their communities to fulfill obligations incurred by government funding of their education or because salaries were higher in Indigenous communities. By virtue of being rural or remote, you could tell their heart wasn't in it. They just went through the motions. They didn't reach out to people in the community. They were happiest when no one came to the appointment. They approved when practitioners showed genuine interest in the people and their culture and appeared to be excited about their work. Passion was seen as contagious. As one elder said, you can tell when someone really likes what they do and the people with it and the people they do it with. 7. Assist students to maintain their independence from politics. The elders were insistent that healers need independence from laws, politics, and medical establishment. They insisted that they could answer only the Creator and to the people who came to see them and none other. The historical context for this, of course, was the Indian Act in Canada, 1857, which made spiritual ceremonies and healing illegal. Similar laws were enacted in the United States. Although there are many hospitals and healthcare systems where traditional healing is welcome, it is also true that when traditional healing is placed within the conventional medicine system, freedom to practice can be lost. Providers can be limited to the number of visits allowed with each patient, how long they can spend with patients, with modalities that can be used for any patient or limited to working only with specific diagnoses. The elders had knowing knobs and hearing the story, of course that would happen, one said. It's all about greed. 8. Teach students the importance of faith, hope, and the power of the activated mind. The elders agreed that hope is only necessary for those of us who struggle in the throes of uncertainty, like patients with life-threatening illnesses or those with chronic illness for whom medicine has no answers, or the depressed, the homeless, or the disenfranchised. It is for when we can't be certain an answer or cure is forthcoming. Hope springs from a different source than knowledge. The spring nourishing the waters of hope requires no science to make it flow. Having studied Buddhism for many years, I shared a guided meditation I did with a man, framing our shared concepts in Buddhist terms. The elders agreed that this was a good example of how they thought. This meditation was about being in the present moment, even if the body dies, of focusing upon the ocean and not the wave, of seeing the nausea and pain as a wave that will pass. The concept of mindfulness or empty mind was very familiar to them. Your mind must be empty in order to hear the spirits, one said. 9. Teach students to prefer empowerment more than treatment. Although not all elders used the term empowerment, the concept was quite familiar. We cannot fix anyone, they said. Only the Creator has the power. And we cannot make anyone do what spirits tells them to do. We can only tell them stories to uplift, inspire them, and make them believe in their own power and act in the power of the spirits to respond to what they do. Another said, if you hear enough good stories of other people getting well, you begin to believe that you can too. You know when someone is really on a road to getting well because suddenly there's that spark of knowing that what they do really matters and that every little step they take towards getting well makes a difference. 10. Teach students the importance of community. I share a story about Joseph, whose chronic fatigue never improved. His fatigue deepened, his joints hurt. Despite what I thought were my best efforts, he continued to decline. At my wit's end, I called one of the elder advisors who suggested that I ask Joseph to bring everyone he knew to our next appointment. He went around the circle with each person holding the talking stick, being able to talk to their heart's content without interruption, all addressing the question of why Joseph wasn't getting better. By the end of the 2-hour session, they had given me a treatment plan and told me exactly how to proceed with Joseph. I wondered why I hadn't gathered them much earlier. Armed with their advice, my work with Joseph changed radically as he did. The group he brought continued to meet monthly to struggle with the question of how each of them individually and the group collectively could help Joe towards recovery. I realized that any attempt of my part to claim effectiveness was short-sighted. We all did it together. The elders said that it was similar to what happens in the healing lodge. Some also used talking sticks. They agreed that the community has much more power to heal than the individual does. Another remembered one of the elders who said that the old ceremonies weren't as powerful anymore because the community wasn't as strong as it used to be. The elders said that the community contains the wisdom individual lacks. Collective minds offer more wisdom than individual minds. This is why some elders say ceremony is done with more than one person. Everyone's prayers and intentments matter. The elders agree that this story illustrated their principle of the importance of ceremony, of community, importance of community. The elders said that all faiths had similar goals in mind. The importance of knowing what life is, the necessity of knowing the time we have here on this planet, and maybe even more important, how love grew between those that were thrown into the airplane of pain. Within this context, he said, only Creator knows what the final outcome will be. It is wrong to tell people how long they will live. We cannot know that. Powerful transformations and healings do happen, and we should not try to convince people of the inevitably of their intimate death, nor should we try to whitewash the severity of their illness and how serious it is. 12. Teach students that all healing is ultimately spiritual healing. Elders agree that all healing was fundamentally spiritual healing. Without the Spirit's permission, no healing could occur. For them, spiritual healing represents the deepest healing, with others lagging behind. Spiritual healing was seen as the most fundamental form of healing, the other methods riding on top of it. All agreed that the idea that the individual spirit had to want to get well before any intervention, even surgery, could work. The spirit's willingness to be well was a necessary ingredient. One elder told a story about a man who came from a healing from his colon cancer. This elder received a very strong message from a spirit guide that this man's spirit wanted to leave this world. Nevertheless, the elder did his best to help. The cancer surgery was surprisingly a complete success. The several cancers that have been found had coalesced into more or less contagious and very removable tumor. The surgeons were thrilled and predicted complete recovery. On the way to the hospital, as he was walking out the door, the man dropped dead from a massive heart attack. The man's spirit had its wish. If we believe these elders, mental health training should be modified. Perhaps we should emphasize learning how to listen without theory and teach theory, less interviewing and dialogue skills before we teach theory. We should increase our exposure of students to non-European or mainstream worldviews and to how other cultures see the world differently from their own. Not as an object of study, but as potentially equal point of view to standard perspectives, logical positivism of conventional social science, psychology, and medicine. We should use community mentors, such as elders, from the communities in which our students will work. They should be equally collaboratives with adjacent faculty appointments. We should include more training on methods of work that involve communities and larger groups than just the individual. Here I'm going to read a traditional medicine man story. He started his life with history of residential school. His whole family, parents attended. They were all physically, emotionally, and sexually abused. He was less than 7 years old when he first experienced all this as a victim. And as he grew older, he became the abuser. He was thinking this is all normal, the sexual abuse from the age and older from the residential school and his family. This sexual abuse is all normal and happens with every family. And this is how to receive love and attention by asking for that only. So he tells me a story where he's not sexually attacked or touched, thinking he did. He tells me a story where he is not sexually attacked or touched, thinking he did something wrong. Why is this person from a family member not paying attention to me anymore? Meaning, why is his father, uncle, aunt not sexually abusing him anymore? This was the only way he understood how he would get attention from them. This was love in his eyes. He goes so far as accepting this normal within every family that soon he finds himself swimming with his sisters and cousins, and they are all planning and talking about intercourse, when and how they were going to do it. This was stopped by him moving away. After several bad relationships and him now, the abuser was not acting out the same abuse he experienced at the age 7. He was demanding sex as the way of showing love from the relationships. And when he did not get this, he would act out physically, emotionally, and find others to fill that need. After almost committing suicide, he receives a sign from the bad alcohol and drug abuse. He was ready to take his own life until something took him away from that area. He started to experience time loss and not remembering where and how he got where he was. He goes on about his healing journey. He started in the Western way by drying out, then moving onward. He knew there was more to this healing. He did not want to be a dry drunk. He wanted to attend sweat lodge and fasting. He started to attend sweat lodges, fasting, which started his healing path. His first healing path was when he attended sweat lodge, and when he went in, he met a spirit that pushed him back to earth. Knowing he had all that experience he was experiencing, he had to tell a story. He tells me a story where he had to go back after as he could remember and learn and understand what it was not these, and understand that it was not these people's fault for doing that to him. It was colonialism. It was the colonialism. He went through each skin like peeling off a layer from an onion, opening up each and every piece of that trauma, abusive sexual history within his family. He then learned he had to give back first to those that hurt him, and then give back from all he has seen, feel, learn, in order to bring this sexual abuse cycle to an end. He learned he had to give back first to those who hurt him, and then to give back love to them, and to give back love to them, to forgive them. He explains the story of how he explains the story how he was forced to dig deep into his stomach gut to pull all the shame, guilt out of him so he can heal. These feelings was so evil and toxic. He then later on, after going through years of healing, he helps those on how to release these bad spirits. This all takes years, not months of healing and breaking that cycle. He goes on to show how he works with others by finding out the cause and slowly building trust with them, to then slowly breaking into the smaller pieces in order for him to dig deeper into the person and slowly peel away. For every layer, he does this with every person. Person is stuck is not taking care. A person that is stuck there is not taking any responsibility for their actions or for what they went through. They are still there in that time of abuse, place as a victim, but now might be placing or acting out as the abuser.